Welcome to the ChronCast, a division of the Chronicle and IMI. We hope you'll enjoy today's podcast episode, and if you do, please be sure to leave a like and share it around. Also, be sure to follow us in our social medias, which will be linked in the description box below. Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of the ChronCast. I'm your host, Aditya, Thiyag.
And I'm your co-host, Nishka, Mishra.
Nishka, how was your break?
It was good. How was yours, Aditya?
I had so much fun. I went to California and the weather was absolutely stunning. And the album that I played the most while I was on vacation there was An Evening with Silk Sonic by Bruno Mars and Paak. Have you heard it?
Yeah, I actually have.
Great. So the reason that I enjoyed it, I think, so much while I was in California is the album just gave off that summer vibe. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like tracks like Skate and even the single they released back in February or March, Leave the Door Open. It had a very triumphant, happy, feel-good energy to it. And I think I really associate that kind of music with summer, and hearing that in like the California environment, it was really cool. I'm really glad I got to be able to make memories with it. What was your favorite track on the album?
My favorite track, probably, I don't know if people didn't like this one, was probably 777, because I'm not a huge fan of slow ballads, even though I did like the ones I had. But I don't know, 777 just stuck in my head. No reason whatsoever. How about you, Aditya?
I personally, I absolutely adore this album. If you haven't checked it out already, I wrote a glowing review on it on mhschronicle.com. I'll be sure to leave that in the description box below. But my favorite track was probably Smoking Out the Window. This one they released as a single a week before the album dropped. And it's the one I probably ended up playing the most, just because, I mean, obviously that hook will instantly get stuck in your head. I think the way they alternate between singing the hook and the verses, because Bruno Mars does start out singing and then Anderson does the hook and then they swap it for the second verse. I think the entire 70s feel of that track, it encapsulates a slower aspect of the song, because it's not exactly as fast-paced as something like Skate or 777, but it's not as slow as something like Put on a Smile, After Last Night. It's that perfect middle ground for me, and I think that both of them were stepping out of their comfort zone respectively, because when examining, I'm a massive Bruno Mars fan, and my favorite album from him is 24 Karat Magic, and that's a very 80s influenced record. So for him to step into left field and do something more 70s based, and even Paak, who makes, I won't say full-on rap music, but very rap influenced R&B. I think Smoking Out the Window was a great middle ground for both of them. It had them both stepping out of left field, and that was definitely my favorite track.
I think the first time I heard the track was on TikTok, which makes me seem like a bad person, but that's where it was trending. I don't know if it still is, but the whole the chorus and everything, and that's where I heard it, and that's really what got me into wanting to listen to the album, because I loved the song and it was stuck in my head for weeks after. So
yeah, Smoking Out the Window, I feel like you could say that every single one of these songs has an element to them that gets stuck in your head. I feel like for me, whether it's the bass on After Last Night, which by the way is done by American bassist Thundercat, I really wanted to address that because there are no features on this album. It's narrated by 70s legend Bootsy Collins, but the only feature on the album that's present is Thundercat. So really quickly, I wanted to ask you, what did you think about the fact that the album didn't really have a lot of features and it was just Bruno Mars and Paak?
I didn't really think that was strange. I'm not someone who's really into music as in critiquing it, so I actually didn't realize it till you pointed it out. But I think this album is really just an evening with the two of them. It's literally what it's called, so I think it makes more sense that it's just the two of them. You're sitting down for 30 minutes, just a literal evening with, Bruno Mars and Paak. So I think that was perfect almost.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people wanted to see more features, but I totally agree with what you were saying about how this was just meant to be an event with the two of them hosted by this 70s legend. But going back to the one feature that is on the album, Thundercat, I don't know if you have you heard of Thundercat prior to listening to this album?
No.
That's really great. I'm really glad to hear it, purely because, so I've been a Thundercat fan for a couple of years now. I heard his 2014 album release, my favorite song from it was Them Changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he won a Grammy in 2020 for his album release, It Is What It Is.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that between that Grammy and now with the Silk Sonic record, he's finally getting some mainstream recognition, because he is an extremely talented bassist. Like, his contributions to After Last Night, I know he didn't really have like a verse or anything, but that bass will instantly get stuck into your head and just contributed to the whole 70s aesthetic of the album.
Yeah. I really liked that song, and I could hear the bass even if I didn't know who Thundercat was, which was like nice.
Yeah. Was there anything else that really stuck out to you in terms of like catchy like lyrics or catchy elements?
I really liked Fly As Me. That one definitely was.
Yeah, my friend, his favorite track is Fly As Me, and I can definitely see why, because I know you really enjoyed 777, which we'll get into later because I think that might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion. But Fly As Me definitely has that triumphant sound with the horns peering in and out in between the verses and the chorus. And the bit at the end where like Paak is addressing the audience, he's like, I want you guys to spell it out for me.
Yeah.
I think that's enough to get anyone excited, let alone
sure.
like people who are interested in music. So I think it's, prior to us dissecting and going through the track list, I just wanted to know, I've been a longtime fan of Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars, but as someone who isn't exactly like a massive music nerd or like hasn't followed their careers as closely, what were your general impressions of this album?
Impressions. So Bruno Mars, like I've known, 24 Karat, like danced to a few songs when I was a kid. Like I know who he is. I like have heard of Anderson .Paak, and I think I've heard a few of his songs, but I didn't really know much about him. And I like honestly, I didn't know that the two of them like the chemistry they had on the album and just like the way their voices fit together was something like that surprised me, because I didn't know who I really didn't know who Anderson .Paak was, and I didn't know that they like were friends, I guess. But I loved how well it blended together, and just like the R&B style feel was like with like all of the ballads, and Bruno Mars obviously his like love, like his serenades were have always been my favorite. So I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned the fact that you didn't even know that Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars were friends. But I don't think, could you tell that on the album?
I don't know how you would tell that on an album, but
in the sense that like I feel like the chemistry that the pair had made it seem like they were a duo for like years.
It seemed like they were an old band reuniting or something like that.
Exactly, but that was just me, right? I wanted to like hear like from your perspective, what did you think about the chemistry that the two had? Because I know you just touched on it.
I think they did, like their voices melded so well. Like I didn't know they were friends, but when I heard this, I just thought, oh, like they just like sort of knew each other. It didn't seem like he was like featured on the track, on like Bruno Mars's track. Like when I first heard of like this was Bruno Mars's album, that's what I heard of it. So I was like, oh, this Anderson guy is just featuring on it. But like it's just really a conversation between like the two of them in the song, which are like the songs, which are great.
And I think that like obviously Bruno Mars is the bigger artist, at least prior to this album's release. But like I'd really say that Anderson .Paak held his own throughout the entire track list. Like he really commanded Fly As Me. He has a very rap centric background. He was actually on, so there's a rap magazine known as Double XL, and every year they have a freshman list of like up and coming rappers.
Right. And
he was actually featured on the list in 2016. So like he definitely does have that rap centric background, and that I think aided him in faster tracks like 777 and Fly As Me, because he was able to just speed up his flow. It wasn't as slower paced. And that compensates, in my opinion, for he doesn't have as strong of a vocal capability as someone like a Bruno Mars.
Right. And I wanted to ask you, as someone who's like a longtime fan of Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, did this album like hold up to what you were expecting, or did you have any doubts about this collaboration?
As soon as I heard that these two were linking up, like in my head I knew like these are two of the most consistent artists on the planet, right? Like I genuinely don't believe that either of them have had like any glaring missteps throughout their career. Anderson .Paak, his last few albums with Malibu in 2016, Oxnard, I think in 17 or 18, and then Ventura, which actually won a Grammy in 2019. Like, those were 3 albums that I thoroughly enjoy, and he was working with like a variety of people on there. And with Bruno Mars, like, he's never been one to stay in his comfort zone with the sound. Sure. Like, Unorthodox Jukebox is like nostalgic, and obviously Doo-Wops and Hooligans was like his breakout tape, but 24 Karat Magic completely went into the 80s aesthetic. So I think hearing 2 people so versatile, so accomplished, and so consistent, there was never really a doubt in my mind that this would go bad, but it really surprised me, like, how much they respectfully stepped outside of their comfort zones. I know that you haven't like really listened to either of their music like that, but were you able to clearly tell like the 70s influence on the album?
I don't think I could tell 70s as like a decade, because I don't understand like the decades and what's the difference, but it definitely gave me like an old school style feel. Like when I was listening to it, it didn't feel like 2021 music, which wasn't a bad thing. It like did have that old feel of like, you know, vintage cameras, vintage like TV, and I could just like feel that while I was listening to it, and I really liked that. So
yeah, and I honestly am not like a massive decades expert or anything, but I have like, I think what you were saying about the vintage feel, even with the cameras, like that is something that I felt. So I think I really quickly want to just walk through the track list, because I think like the structure of the album is really important. So on the first track, I mean, this is just like a brief introduction. It's not really even like a full song. It's just a skit. You have the pair singing like, "Who y'all came to see tonight?" And like that, listening to that for the first time just really got me excited, because that's when I knew that this wasn't just an album. It felt more like an event.
It felt like an experience. Like this, like the intro song, when they were like telling you, it felt like the introduction to a concert where like the artist would come up and get the crowd hyped, you know, and like a concert experience in your own home. Yeah,
and like that really contributes to the idea and the theme of the album being an evening with Silk Sonic. It's just not, it's not like a playlist of songs, right? It's not even just an ordinary album. It's an evening with the pair, and this felt like the kickoff. Right.
And I think like usually like I don't listen to albums in order, but like this album made sense that it went in order, and I really liked like the way that the track list went down, and it did really feel like an evening with like the high parts, the low slow ballads, and then obviously like the ending and the introduction.
Yeah, and right after this little intro track, I love that you mentioned the sequencing, because right after that we get the lead single for the album, "Leave the Door Open," which I think both of us have heard like a million times, whether we're out with our friends or even on like TikTok, like you were saying.
Right.
But to me, at least, I want to hear your perspective. But no matter how many times I listen to that song, it doesn't get old for me.
Yeah, I heard "Leave the Door Open" like before like the actual album released, and so like when I looked at the album, this was one of the songs that I could recognize and obviously like love for that.
Yeah, and a common critique, one of our fellow Chronicle staff members was talking about when he first listened to the album, he was like, he felt a little disappointed because he thought "Leave the Door Open" was the best song and it was released as a single. Did you think that listening to "Leave the Door Open" months before the album came out really like diminished your enjoyment of the album at all?
No, I think it actually like was the opposite. Like for me, I heard "Leave the Door Open" before, and so like I got hooked onto that song before listening to the album. So when I saw the album track list, like I saw a song that I could recognize and immediately go, okay, I already like the song, I like the feel of it, I can get into the album. That really helped me, because I don't like listening to new music if I don't really know much, so that sort of gave like a foot in the door.
Yeah, and I think that having this song directly after the introduction was really smart on their end, purely because this is the song that they know that everyone's heard already.
Right.
So it kind of eases you into this evening with Silk Sonic because you're already comfortable. You already have listened to the song a bunch of times. You know what the feel of it is. And it's just a relaxed way to get you into the album. And to address the critique of like this would be the best song on the album, in my opinion, Leave the Door Open would be the best song on a majority of the albums released this year in terms of pop music. Like, I think it has such a unique, 70s feel. The structure of the song, its usage of live instrumentals all throughout this record. I just think that it was a perfect introduction to the world for Silk Sonic. And I think that even though they released it as a single, and even if you think it's the best song on the album, that's not a diss at any of the other songs on the album. It's more a compliment, because Leave the Door Open is just a fantastic song.
And as much as I enjoyed Leave the Door Open, you know, slow ballads really aren't my type. And Fly As Me, you know, the next song on the album, was great for people like me after listening to such a slow song, just to like get the hype back up from the album, from the intro song. And I think that song and 777 are like competing for the top spot.
Yeah, and Fly As Me, like, just how upbeat it is, you're totally right. I really get that triumphant feel from the horns that continuously play throughout the song. But even like Anderson .Paak, how like quickly he's flowing like on his verses, it really hooks you into the feel of the song. It really like gets you energetic. And I think something that's really underappreciated about this song, and maybe this album even in general, is how much it really wouldn't work if Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars weren't really like as charismatic as they were. Cause
so true.
Cause like Anderson .Paak has like kind of like average lyrics on Fly As Me. Like they're very stereotypical. I think he says like float like a butterfly on every single track. And like that's a very like average line. You've probably heard it once. But it's just the way he delivers it and the amount of confidence he has going in. Like, it's impossible not to fall in love with the song.
Yeah, I think they're both just, like, very charming, and I think that just adds to the whole 70s feel as well. Like, you're being, like, you know, charmed at, like, an evening or, like, some event, which was, like, a nice feel to the whole album.
Yeah, and did you feel like it was abrupt coming after Leave the Door Open?
I think a little bit. I think I didn't expect it to be, like, when I was looking at the names, you can't really tell much of the song, but I thought this would be a slow ballad as, you know, the other ones, like, Fly As Me, I don't know. But, so it was a little bit of a shock, but I think it was a good, like, contrast surprise. You know, you can't just it wasn't mundane. It was, like, keep you on your toes kind of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think what's even more interesting is even if this wasn't as big of a shift, I personally think that the shift from Fly As Me to After Last Night was extreme. Like, that was a stark contrast.
Yeah, for sure.
Because something like After Last Night, it is probably the slowest song on the album.
Definitely.
Outside of maybe the outro track, right? But, like, it literally starts out with this little skit from Bootsy Collins, and you're instantly, like, serenaded. The bass starts hitting with Thundercat.
For someone who doesn't know much about, like, Bootsy Collins and, like, their influence, do you mind, like, talking about it a little bit?
So, Bootsy Collins, I'm also, don't kill me, but I'm not the biggest, like, funk soul fan in terms of, like, classic stuff.
Right.
But from what my understanding is, like, Bootsy Collins is, like, a 70s legend. And he's actually from Cincinnati. So...
That's really cool.
Yeah. And he started his career around, I think, 1968. And he contributed a lot to the 70s, like, scene. So a large part of the reason why I personally think that Mars and Paak chose to have him narrate the album is because since they were going for that 70s aesthetic, there was no better person to do it than a 70s legend. It would be like if Bruno Mars had Michael Jackson narrate 24 Karat Magic, if that makes sense. But going back to something like After Last Night, I really enjoyed, I know we addressed it earlier, but the contributions that Thundercat brought, even though it was just an instrumental, the bass got stuck in your head.
Right.
And what was your favorite part about, like, this specific song? What really stood out to you?
I think now that you mention, like, the instrumentals was played by someone else, that, like, kind of rung a bell, because when I was listening to this song, obviously I didn't know who Thundercat was, so like the entire time I was listening to it, I was like trying to hear for someone featured. Like, I thought this person was like a singer, and I was like confused while listening to it. But I think going back and just remembering the instrumentals and the beat, like you were talking about, was played by someone, was something that made it a lot more interesting because it wasn't like a feature where someone was singing, which is what is more common, and so it was a bit unusual for me, but I liked that they did it.
And having like that presence of the bass, even though it's there present on other tracks, I think that funk style is what is what Thundercat brought to the track. I know we're talking about him a lot for this song, but it's kind of like a given that Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak like literally killed it, right? And I thought there were some really funny lines on here, like you made me throw my phone out the window. And then I think my favorite part about that is it wasn't just a throwaway line. They start off the second verse by saying, like, if I still had my phone, I'd call up every girl I know and say goodbye. Like, little things like that were something that could be just a stereotypical, like, oh, girl, I would do this for you.
Right.
They brought it back. They connected something that happened earlier in the song back to what they were doing.
And I think you wouldn't, like, realize that until you, like, fully dissected the lyrics. But I think lyrical, like, you know, like, sort of riddles and poems like that. Not even riddles. I don't know what you would call it. But, like, just alluding to, like, different parts of the song. And, like, I think it was a nice statement, especially because Bruno Mars is known for, like, his catchy, flirtatious lines or like that.
Yeah.
So.
Like, and it's so interesting to see his evolution from I would catch a grenade to you to something a little more, like, lyrically complex. I really wanted to talk about my favorite song of the album, which is the next one. They released this a week before, as I mentioned before, but something about Smoking Out the Window, like, really connected with me.
That, like, it was a very catchy song, and the chorus of it, like, you hear it all throughout TikTok on, like, every social media. Like, it was trending everywhere, and I think, you know, it goes to show it was such, like, it was so different to hear Bruno Mars, like, talk about something like that, as, like, you were talking about how it was different from his, like, when he was I would catch a grenade from you sort of era to now is, like, sort of a lovely evolution, and I think this song brings it together as a whole.
To connect back to what you were saying earlier when you were talking about, like, that vintage like camera feel, I don't know, have you seen any of the music videos for any of these songs?
I've seen Smoking Out the Window.
Smoking Out the Window, I love that music video, and my favorite part about it, outside of the given, like, not to be dramatic, but I want to die, and then Anderson .Paak's just laying on the floor, that's gold to me. But if you're watching the music video, they're dressed in, like, all brown. They have, like, these backup singers. It's, like, a very, like, it gives off, like, a shiny, wealthy aesthetic.
Right.
And I think that, obviously, like, when you're listening to the album, you can't tell it. But I think the amount of detail they paid, even to something like a music video, kind of added to the whole feel of the album. Because they didn't need to put that much detail
into the music video. I liked it. It was a fun music video. It felt like you were at, like, now that you're saying 70s, like a 70s nightclub, you know, spending the evening with them, which I think was what they were going for. And I think they achieved that, so.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you bring up, like, a club, because that is what their music was trying to be. It's not like an electro pop club that you would see today. Just a bunch of people hanging out in a social setting, having a good time. And I think that's the kind of music that they Paak and Mars really wanted to make, which is really ironic because the song directly after this is not something that I feel like you would hear at, like, a social gathering or anything, because it's Put on a Smile, and that's sort of, like, the most vulnerable that either of them are on the album, because it's kind of talking about how, like, they're trying to they're putting on a smile, pretending to be happy, even though they really, like, want this girl, whereas throughout the rest of the album they're just kind of, like, braggadocious.
Playboys, and, like, it definitely was. It wasn't, like, my favorite song because I didn't feel like it fit really with the entire vibe. Like, what I was getting sort of as, like, a theme or, like, a feeling with it was that they were, like, playboys or, like, you know, like, in a club, and it was sort of, like, hype, and, like, they were just talking about all of these girls that they get, which is, like, Bruno Mars's feel to me. And I think Put on a Smile was different, and I didn't necessarily enjoy that it was, like, the contrast that way. I think it could have been better, like, as a single off the album, but I still enjoyed the song as a whole for their vulnerability.
I think it's really interesting that you felt like it didn't fit with the natural flow of the album, and I completely understand where you're coming from, because in terms of lyrics, as you said, it is extremely different from the rest of the album. But I feel like having this one moment where they are both allowed to be just themselves kind of humanize them, because obviously they are these wealthy like celebrity artists, but they're still people too. And I think outside of just the lyrics, the reason I personally thought this album or this song existed on the album is because it was very reminiscent of, have you heard Versace on the Floor off of 24 Karat Magic?
Yes.
So that very like slow song, that very like sensual song where he's opening up, and like I just thought that it was an extremely nice callback to Bruno Mars's early days, where it's something like Grenade or something like a Moonshine, where he's being really vulnerable rather than just a playboy. So I like that they paid homage to like how far he's come, but I could totally see why you would want it released as a single.
And I think talking about the playboy thing again gets you into 777, which is a complete contrast of the song, where you're like literally at like a casino or a club gambling, which is like so different. And I think I loved like the lyrics and just the entire feel of the song. I don't know how to explain it, but it's definitely my favorite. But I know a lot of people don't like it. Do you, like, why?
If I was to think, so I'm sure it's come off across already, but I absolutely adore this album, so I don't know why anyone wouldn't like it. But I think for me, the reason why I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, find out why someone doesn't like it. But I think a reason that someone wouldn't really vibe with this song is the mixing on Bruno Mars's vocals and even Anderson .Paak's. It's very harsh.
Right.
Like the little tune that they play at the very start, like that loops. It's very like rough, and then Bruno Mars just kind of comes in. He's like
the beginning too. That's what got me into the song.
Yeah, and I'm glad that just kind of goes to show that like they really made a song for everyone on this album.
For sure.
But like for someone who didn't enjoy it, like coming off of something as slow and as sensual as like Put on a Smile, to just have Bruno Mars like really aggressively going blow the dice on it, like into the mic, like that is definitely extremely different. Maybe not lyrically, but in terms of the feel, the sound, it's less playboy, more like aggressive. So I think that could be a reason why people were kind of put off from it.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. Is there anything in particular? I know you really enjoyed like hype style songs, but was there any one thing in particular that stood out to you about 777 that really made it?
I think just like the chorus, like when they go like let's go, and like I love like the instrumental music, like the music in the beginning and the music like after the chorus that they have was just like probably what made it my favorite song.
777.
Yeah.
Let's go. Yeah, and then the horns go absolutely crazy. I know they released the next track as a single, which actually didn't perform that well. I don't know. I actually
didn't hear it as a single before the album.
So Skate, track number 8, is actually a single that released before the album. And although it had like critical acclaim, it didn't really perform very well. Do you have, I wanted to know what your thoughts were in terms of like listening to Skate in context of the album. What did you think?
I think like if you're talking about it not doing as well as a single, I think it was a great song, like musically, obviously, like Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak like have great musical skills, but I don't think it relates to as like a pop song or a standalone song. It didn't fit really well as like, you know what I mean, like Leave the Door Open is like a pop song, or like Smoking Out the Window, you could hear these like trending, you know, in like malls, museums. I don't think Skate was one that fits outside the album, but I liked it in the album, especially like where it was towards the end, because it felt like a nice like downhill slope towards like the resolution or whatever of the album.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like very aggressive like 777, and it wasn't super fast paced like Fly As Me, but it was very relaxed. It was very fun. This is the most fun track on the album in my opinion. And I think what you were talking about, Smoking Out the Window and Leave the Door Open, that definitely resonated with me, because I feel like after we got such an extensive rollout, I mean, this Leave the Door Open came out in like February or March. Like, it was marketed, it was heavily talked about for months on ends. They did live renditions, but literally with Skate, right? Like that single did not get that much promo,
right?
And it was not Leave the Door Open. It wasn't as grand. It wasn't as adventurous. It felt a lot more safe. And I think that's the reason why maybe it didn't perform as well.
Yeah.
But regardless, I really enjoyed the song. This one also has a really fun music video where Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, they're like playing the drums and then a bunch of people are like skating around them. It's filmed with that vintage feel. So I think this is probably one of the more forgettable tracks on the album, but I personally really enjoyed it. But
you personally really enjoyed everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great album. And I think a testament to this album's strength is that someone could pick out literally any song on this album and deem it their favorite, and you could probably understand why. And I think like a strong contender for that is actually one that I don't think gets talked about enough, which is Blast Off, the outro song. I think that this song, it's nowhere near as grand as the rest of the album, but I don't think it's meant to be. Like, you brought up that Skate felt like a resolution.
Yeah.
I think it brought the tone back to a more light feel. I think Blast Off was the real resolution of the album. Like, the evening is over, you're blasting off into space, it's done, it's like a celebration. But it's not like a typical triumphant, massive explosion.
It's like a send-off song, because most of the time albums end off with like a big bang, and they want you know what I mean, like a dramatic ending. I think the reason they had Blast Off, I mean, I don't know, but it felt like you know, we're like sending you out the door, like go on, enjoy the rest of your night kind of feel, which was really like a tribute to the theme of the album.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up because like when you were talking about like a grandiose feel, the album that I think of Kanye West's Donda, which released earlier this year. Like, he ended, outside of, there are bonus tracks which are titled Part 2s, but he originally ends the album with No Child Left Behind, which is a grand, I mean, there's like this church organ playing, like this person is repeating that phrase, and it's meant as this like massive event, but Blast Off, while not as grandiose in comparison, is very, like, as you were saying, it's a send-off.
Right.
It's like, I'm sorry, all things have to come to a close, but we hope you had fun. And while it might not fit, at least for me, as a standalone track, I think it does its job really well as an outro.
Yeah, and I think with that, we can send you guys off. We really hoped you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, and please check out Aditya's review on it. 5 out of 5 stars from him. You can see through the it's episode why. So we hope you had a good time.
We know that this episode is coming like a solid month after our last one. We really do apologize about that. I think we're gonna be uploading pretty consistently, probably on a weekly basis. We have a lot of fun things planned for you guys in the future. We will try to get this up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts soon. If they are up, we will add them in the description box below. But if not, please be sure to check us out on our social medias. And please read my review. And I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast and enjoyed the album as well. And this is Aditya Thiyag signing off.
This is Nishka Mishra signing off.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the ChronCast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to be notified when our next episode goes live, please be sure to follow us on all of our social medias as well as hitting the subscribe button. In addition, if you want to check out our other podcast, The Interview by Alex Daracel, a link will be provided in the description box below. We hope you'll choose to join us again on the next episode.